We're learning the fourth Sikha of Parshas Pinchas in Chelek Yud on page 351. The Shir today is being learned L'Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rab Menashe Koltman. In Zoyar auf der heintige Sedere wird gebracht der Maimer. In the Zoyar in this week's Parsha you have the following statement, which is actually also brought in the Gemara in Brachas. Kol man da Omar, Tehillah David b'chol yoyim tla zimnin. Anyone that says Tehillah David, which we refer to as Ashrei, the capital in Kuf Mem Hey in Tehillim starts with Tehillah David, but we begin from Ashrei and then we add another pasuk of Ashrei that comes from earlier in Tehillim. So if you say this 3 times a day, Iyu bar al medasi, so you will merit to be a ben olam haba, to be in the world to come. On miz mevayer, and it's explained as Terei Zimni, saying Ashrei every day twice is mechuyev to sagen Tehillah David. So you're obligated to say Tehillah David twice a day. Why? Begin mazayne or parnase b'chol yomeh. This is the way we are asking Hashem for the zaynes, the sustenance we need, or the parnase that we need for every day. And it's primarily that the pasuk of Pesach es yedecha must be chol chayratzen that there is in Tehillah David. On the dritte Mal, the third time when we say Ashrei, is lav begin chayva. It's not an obligation, sli bakoshes anal, in connection with the requests that a person is asking Hashem for his mezainis and parnasa. Ella begin shvacha. Rather, it's the psukim and Ashrei which are a praise to Hashem. His mevaya de tate in seine Oris of Zoyar, so the Rebbe's father explains in his comments to the Zoyar as follows: As the amirif until David lazimnen, saying Tehillah David 3 times a day is Kamaya Gimel Tfilis. It's similar to this that we daven 3 times a day. Vasazay steht beferish in Pirish Rashi l'Shas. Rashi in the Gemara in Brachas says this clearly. Shalish Pa'amim. We say Tehillah David 3 times a day. Keneged Shalish Tfilis, corresponding to the 3 times we daven Shachris, Mincha, and Ma'ariv. So the Rebbe's father explains: Kishem vitzvei Tfilis Shachris and Mincha zenen chayva. Davening Shachris and Mincha is an obligation. Und Tfilas Arves Rishos. Davening Ma'ariv is only voluntary. As there's a discussion about this in the Gemara, there's an argument, and we follow the opinion that davening Ma'ariv is voluntary. So the same is also regarding saying Tehillah David 3 times a day, as Terei Zimni Chiyuvi al Barnash. Twice is an obligation, like Shachris and Mincha. On einmal begin shvacha, and then the third time is just for the purpose of praising the Eibishter. But das is kemoi v'al derech tfilas arvis rishos. Similar to this, that davening Ma'ariv is only voluntary, so it's sort of an extra davening, an extra praise for Hashem. Similar also with the third time saying Tehillah David. The Tzemach Tzedek in seine Rishimis of Tehillim. The Tzemach Tzedek has his notes that he wrote on Tehillim. Brengt and Pirish Rashi anal. So he quotes what Rashi says as the Gimel Pamim Tehillah David and a Keneged Shalish Tfilis, 3 times saying the Tehillah David every day, corresponding to the 3 times we daven every day. Fragt, and he asks the following question: that if this is true, hat man gedacht sagen Tehillah David euch Tfilis Arvis. So then the third time saying Tehillah David Ashrei should be in Ma'ariv, like the other 2 times that we say it in Shachris and Mincha. Why do we say twice Tehillah David in Shachris? Once in Psuke de Zimra and then once after Shmei Nesra. And 1 time by Mincha. So on the andere Empferen, there are those that explain the pshat in this. And they say as follows: As Tfilas Arvis is nit kin zman of amiras Ashrei. That by davening Ma'ariv, it's not the right time to say Ashrei. Weil ein zman tefillah tehillah balayla. Nighttime is not a time to add extra davening, extra tefillas, extra tehillas by night. So therefore, we don't add the capital of Tehillah David at night. Others say weil ein oimrim kedusha ba'arvis. Just like we don't say kedusha in the Chazaras Hashatz when we say the kedusha, the nagdishach. So we don't have that at night. And va'ashrei shayach lekedusha. Saying ashrei is related to kedusha, and therefore, just like we don't have kedusha at night, we don't have ashrei at night either. Und defar sagen wir Tehillah David das zweite Mal in Shachris anstatt Arvis. So if we can't say it by Ma'ariv, so the third time we say the Tehillah David at Shachris after the Shmei Nesra, another time. That's the pshat that there are those that explain regarding the 3 times of saying Tehillah David every day. The Tzemach Tzedek will aber nicht annehmen dem Teretz. The Tzemach Tzedek does not accept this answer. Because either way, it's not understood. Oi, die ganze Takane von dem dritten Mal till David is beschwil till Tevilas Arvis. If, like Rashi says, the third time saying till David is corresponding to Meirev, hat nicht kein Art zu sagen das in an anderer Tefillah in Shachris. So there's no room to say it in another one of the Tefillahs of the day, to say it in Shachris. It belongs in Meirev. It's connected to Meirev. It's because of the Meirev. So if you're not saying it in Meirev, there's nowhere else it should be said. So if it's not possible to say it in Meirev for whatever reason, so then lo yemru rak beis pamim. So then it should only be said twice, once for Shachris and once for Mincha. So the question really still remains, why is it that there is a third time that it should be said in connection to Meirev, but yet, where do we say it? We say it a second time in Shachris. So therefore the Tzemach Tzedek says, as the Maimer Ashas, when the Gemara says, David Gimel Pamim Cholo, that when one says Till David 3 times a day, so then he's a Ben Olam Abba, is This is following the opinion in the Gemara that tells us that davening Meirev is an obligation, just like Shachris and Mincha. Und den dritten Mal sagt man es Tag in Arvis, and according to that opinion, you say Ashrei in Meirev, just like by Shachris and Mincha. Aber anan the Kaimelon halacha kemandama tfilis Arvis rishos. Since we follow the opinion of Shulchan Aruch that Meirev is only voluntary, sagt man it Ashrei kaiden tfilis Arvis. So therefore, we do not say Meirev Ashrei that is in Meirev, because if the Meirev itself is voluntary, so there's no Ashrei that comes along with it. So there's no, in other words, Tzemach Tzedek is saying we can't really reconcile these two opinions of Meirev being a rishos and also this, that we have to say Till David 3 times a day. According to this opinion, Till David is only twice a day. So lefizak kumtais. So according to the Tzemach Tzedek's pshat, it comes out as follows: As loite man damat tfilas arvis rishos was halacha kamaisai. The opinion that says that Meirev is voluntary, and that as we follow that opinion, is genug amidas Till David zwei mal zu werden a ben olam haba. It's sufficient to say Till David twice a day, and you'll be a ben olam haba. He explains there later in using the explanations according to Chassidus, as das was amiras Till David tutoiv betfilas Shachris and Mincha. Whatever saying Till David accomplishes when you say it once in Shachris and the second time in Mincha, so in Meirev, it gets accomplished on its own. The person doesn't have to actually say the Tehillah David in Meirev, but whatever it's supposed to accomplish, it happens on its own. Now, the question though remains, das, was man sagt, Tehillah David Kimmel Pa'amim, zweimal in Shachris, and the fact that our minig, our custom today, is actually to say Tehillah David 3 times a day, and we also say it a second time in Shachris, even though we're following the opinion that Meirev is voluntary, so the third time of Tehillah David is something that happens me'elov, and we don't have to say it. Is this nitzaver and a ben olam haba? It's not that only through this do you become a ben olam haba, nor blois, as the Tzemach Tzedek there says, shalei ledalek ha amiras ashrei gimel pamim. We don't want to skip over saying ashrei 3 times a day. And what the Tzemach Tzedek means by this is, it will be explained soon, that there's still a point of saying Tehillah David the 3rd time, even though it's something that happens on its own, me'elov, and it's seemingly not necessary. This is the pshat of the Tzemach Tzedek. So now, if we look at what the Rebbe's father says, and we look at what the Tzemach Tzedek says, they don't seem to go together at all. Davon verstehen, the question here is, wie stimmt der Bier von Taten? How can we reconcile now the explanation of the Rebbe's father as the dritte Mal sagen Till David is kemoi val derech tfilas arvis rishos? So the Rebbe's father says that the 3rd time saying Till David, and the Zohar tells us that that's only for the purpose of praise, is actually similar to the davening of Meirev, which is voluntary. Was leitem kumtais. So therefore, according to the Rebbe's father, it comes out as even according to the opinion that says that davening Meirev is voluntary, darf me sagen Till David 3 mal zu werden a bar al medasi. So you do need to still say Till David 3 times a day to be a ben olam haba. Says nar was the dritte mal is begin shvacha al derech v'tfilas arvis rishos. There's a difference. The first 2 times are an obligation, like Shachris and Mincha, which are obligatory, and the 3rd time is just a praise similar to Meirev, which is only voluntary. But how do we reconcile this mit dem Bier von Tzemach Tzedek with the explanation that the Tzemach Tzedek says, as Laman Da'amat Tfilas Arvis Rishos, that the opinion that says that davening Ma'ariv is only voluntary is genug to sagen zweimal Tillel David, that it's sufficient to say Tillel David only twice, b'chdei tzevern a ben Olam Haba, to be a ben Olam Haba, and it's not even necessary at all to say it the third time. So how do we understand this? Ich darf me verstehen. Now let's go back to the point mentioned before regarding the explanation of the Tzemach Tzedek, that really we follow the opinion that Ma'ariv is voluntary, so we should only be saying Tillel David twice. So leuten Bier von Tzemach Tzedek, according to the Tzemach Tzedek's explanation, as lahadeye welche is gefi halachas tfilas harvest rishus. The opinion that we follow, that Ma'ariv is only a rishus, is genug zweimal sagen Tillel David zu werden a ben Olam Haba, so it's enough to say Tillel David twice. To be a ben Olam Haba, for was sagen wir Tillel David dreimal b'chol yom. So then why is it that we actually say Tillel David 3 times a day, zweimal zu Shachris, and we say it twice in Shachris, once in the beginning of davening, towards the beginning, in the Psukkah de Zimna, and the second time after Shemoneh Esrei. Now, on das, was the Tzemach Tzedek schreibt, the Tzemach Tzedek gives the reason, as was quoted before, in short, Shaloi ledalek ho'amiras ashrei gimel pamim, that we don't want to skip over saying ashrei 3 times. Other in Oisiyas HaKabbalah v'Chassidus v'Sazog denach, or the way the Tzemach Tzedek says this point, using the expression of Kabbalah and Chassidus, so he says, Tiknu laima b'Shachris beis pamim, it was instituted to say Tillel David twice in Shachris, Al derech leYaakov asher podas Avram, similar to this concept that it says that Yaakov redeems Avraham, and what this means is Teferes mate klape chesed. Teferes, what's Teferes? Teferes is a combination of chesed and gvura. There are in the spheres by the Eibishter, there's chesed, and there's gvura, and then there's Teferes, which is a combination of chesed and gvura. However, even though it's a combination, but chesed is more dominant in the sphere of Teferes, more even than the Gvura that's there. So therefore, Teferes, which is connected to Ma'ariv, so the Tehillah David that would have belonged from Ma'ariv, instead we place it in Shachris, and Shachris is related to Chesed. The 3 tefillas of the day, Shachris is Chesed, Mincha is Gvura, and Ma'ariv is Teferes. So the Tehillah David of Teferes goes into Shachris because Teferes is related to Chesed. That's the expression of Kabbalah that the Tzemach Tzedek says. But does Gufe darf haben Mabir? But this itself needs additional explanation. What does he mean by this? Why is it that we don't want to skip that 3rd time? If after saying Tillel David twice, you are already meriting the world to come. Whatever it would have to accomplish by saying Tillel David a 3rd time Ma'ariv, that happens on its own. So, just like we said regarding Tehillah David, that it happens on its own. Was fehlt noch, als man soll davon sagen, es a dritten Mal? So then what's lacking that it's necessary to say it a 3rd time, and therefore the Tzemach Tzedek says, don't skip that 3rd time, and you say it in Shachris. Okay, so that's the question over here. What's with this? So according to the Tzemach Tzedek's explanation, the 3rd time saying Tehillah David is not really understood. So the point to explain what's going on over here, so to explain what the Rebbe's father is saying, what the Tzemach Tzedek is saying, is as follows. It depends if we're explaining this subject based on what it says in the Gemara. As I mentioned before, this is quoted in the Gemara as well, or as it's quoted in the Zohar. That Tzemach Tzedek redt wie sagt dorten wegen das Shas. The Tzemach Tzedek, as he quotes there, is explaining this according to the way it's explained in the Gemara. On alpin nigle de Torah, according to the revealed aspect of Torah which is in the Gemara, is leman da'amat tfilas arvis rishus. Tzemach Tzedek is telling us that opinion that says that Ma'ariv is only voluntary, hotnit ken art amiras Tillel David betfilas arvis. There's no room for saying Tillel David in Ma'ariv. Or neichnet mit tfilas Shachris b'maken tfilas arvis. And not even to say it in the morning twice by Shachris a 2nd time to replace for not saying it by Ma'ariv. That's according to the Gemara. So therefore it should only be said twice. Mashenken the tate kommt mevaiza in the day of Zoyar. But the Rebbe's father is explaining what it says in the Zoyar, al pi pnimiyus ha-Torah, according to the deeper aspect of Torah. So over here, the Zohar tells us 2 points. Is Aleph, number 1, even the opinion that says that davening ma'ariv is only voluntary, hot and art amiras tilul David. There's still room to say tilul David a 3rd time. Nor the amiras begin shvacha versus kamay val derech reshus. However, the 3rd time is not similar to the other 2 times, which is for the purpose of requesting Hashem for mezainis, for sustenance and parnaseh. But the 3rd time is a praise similar to Ma'ariv, which is a reshus. Bay is another point you see from the Zohar. Di Amir from Tilul David, the 3rd time saying Tilul David, which is Alpha Piazi is connected to Filis Arvis. Yes, on one hand, it is corresponding to Ma'ariv, is Ir Amir B'Payol in Filis Shachris. But we actually say it in Shachris and not in Ma'ariv. So this is true according to the Zohar, according to Pnimiyus HaTorah. So it's true that Tzemach Tzedek is discussing what it says in the Gemara, and the Zohar, and the Rebbe's father that is discussing what it says in the Zohar. Now this explains what the Tzemach Tzedek says, why we actually say it 3 times. On the far is Eichel Tzemach Tzedek Messiah, so therefore even the Tzemach Tzedek that's discussing this from the way it's explained in the Gemara, but nevertheless he concludes and says, don't skip saying it 3 times every day, and the 3rd time you say it in the Shachris, a 2nd time for what you skipped in Ma'ariv. Wie is the Nach Masber, the Shaykhis from Arvis to Shachris al derech HaKabbalah, and this is the point that he explains, there's a connection of Ma'ariv to Shachris, Shah Teferes, Mata Klape Chesed. Ma'ariv that corresponds to Teferes is related to Shachris, which corresponds to Chesed, because Teferes has in it both Chesed and Gvura, but it sort of tilts more towards Chesed, which is Shachris. Und da redt nicht wegen Ikerat HaKane, was is blois beis Pamim, so when the Tzemach Tzedek says you should say it a 3rd time, so he's not discussing what the Gemara tells us, that what they instituted, that it should be said twice, nor wie das is al pnimiyus hanyanim, but he's actually telling you that the actual custom follows the way it is according to the Zohar, the deeper aspect of Torah. Was euch man da mat tfilas harvest reshus, sagt man Tehillah David gimel pamim. That even according to this opinion, Tehillah David should be said a 3rd time corresponding to Ma'ariv. So this is the point of the explanation here, but this needs to be explained. What's taka the difference? Why is it that according to the Gemara, if you follow the opinion that says that Ma'ariv is reshus, voluntary, so then Tehillah David is completely not necessary to say a 3rd time? According to the Zohar, when you follow Pnimiyus HaTorah, so even if Ma'ariv is a reshus, there's still a point to say it a 3rd time. What's the explanation of this? So what we really first have to understand over here is this point here that the Tzemach Tzedek says that if it corresponds to Ma'ariv, then if Ma'ariv is voluntary, you don't have to say it at all. This is not really understood, and the Rebbe explains what the problem here is. Again, what did the Tzemach Tzedek say? As anan de kaimelon tfilas arvis reshus, that since we follow the opinion that Ma'ariv is only voluntary, l'chein ein oimrim ashrei kaiden tfilas arvis. So we don't say ashrei before we daven Ma'ariv. And what the Tzemach Tzedek says is, weil de pu'ule for amiras Tehillah David vadai yumshach me'elov. Whatever it is that it has to accomplish, it's definitely going to be accomplished on its own. You don't have to actually say it. What's from them is move on. Now there's a big chiddush in what the Tzemach Tzedek is saying. We understand from its words as follows. As das was mezaknit Tehillah David ba'arvis leitn man da'amat filas arvis reshus. This that we do not say Ashrei Tehillah David a 3rd time in Ma'ariv, according to the opinion that says that it's only voluntary. Well, why not? The pshat over here is as follows. And here in the parentheses, the Rebbe will bring us a different way how we could explain this. And this is actually the way it's explained in the Kolboy, as the Rebbe points to in Order 19. And he says as follows. So perhaps you would think that the reason would be as follows. And the Tzemach Tzedek is not following this. We would say, it's really pointless to institute to say Tehillah David a 3rd time when you daven Ma'ariv, because you'll institute it to say it a 3rd time, but most people may not end up saying it. Since davening Ma'ariv is only voluntary, and for any other need that stops you from davening Ma'ariv, so very often you don't end up davening Ma'ariv. So if you don't end up davening Ma'ariv, so then instituting to say it a third time, and only if you say it a third time will you be a ben olam haba, is without any tayelis. There's no point to this, because people don't necessarily daven Ma'ariv. That's what seemingly the pshat here would be, why, according to the opinion that Ma'ariv is voluntary, we don't say Tillel David a third time. But that's not what the Tzemach Tzedek says, though. No, rather, what does the Tzemach Tzedek say? Weil melachatchile darf man es nicht sagen a dritte Mal. The Tzemach Tzedek is telling us that it's not necessary at all to say Tillel David a third time to Arvis when you daven Ma'ariv, according to this opinion that it's voluntary. Because according to this opinion that Ma'ariv is only a rishos, whatever Tillel David has to bring into the world, whatever it has to accomplish, it will get accomplished on its own. That's what the Tzemach Tzedek says. So not that we really would need a third time, but it's sort of pointless to institute this because people are not necessarily going to be davening Ma'ariv, but rather whatever it is that has to be done is accomplished. So therefore there's no reason to say it the third time. But the question is nicht verstandig, but now, how do we explain this? What do we say regarding Ma'ariv itself? That Ma'ariv itself is voluntary. While der yichud from tfilas arvis, whatever unification, whatever union we accomplish with davening Ma'ariv, the term yichud is the expression that's used in Kabbalah anytime we bring down a new ashpa, a new flow that comes from a higher level to a lower level, so there's a unification that takes place. So whatever yichud takes place through davening Ma'ariv, wird aufgetan b'derech memele, it really happens on its own. Nachdem wie der Mispalel macht die Achonis zu dem Yichud, durch Tfilas Shachris and Mincha, after you already davened earlier in the day, Shachris and Minchas, or whatever you did, and you're Aveda during the day, so you have already set the table, you've prepared for this new union to come about at night in the time of Ma'ariv, and therefore, davening Ma'ariv is not obligatory. But von deswegen, but yet at the same time, hat me kevei gewen Tfilas Arvis. They still did establish that there's a third Tfilah of Ma'ariv, and it's at least something which is voluntary. So therefore, what do we see here? Even something which comes me'elav, it comes me'mela, and you don't have to daven Ma'ariv, but yet there is a voluntary option to daven Ma'ariv. So the same should be true regarding saying Tillel David a third time in connection to Ma'ariv. It should at least be something which is voluntary to say a third time. If you're going to daven Ma'ariv, you can say Tillel David with it. This actually goes even further. Today, it was established to be an obligation. In other words, even though we're following the opinion that it's only a voluntary, but yet today we consider Ma'ariv to be a obligation, and we have to daven Ma'ariv every night. So the same thing should be with saying Tehillah David in connection with Ma'ariv. Today that we accept davening Ma'ariv as an obligation, so saying Tehillah David the third time should also be an obligation. So why not? Why is it Tzemach Tzedek saying that if we say that Ma'ariv is only a reshos, voluntary, so the Tehillah David does not have to be said at all? Whatever it accomplishes comes me'elav. Why me'elav? Why shouldn't it at least be voluntary to say? Additionally, the question there is, why are we saying that, no, it's impossible, you can't say Tillel David when you daven Ma'ariv? If you're actually going to be davening Ma'ariv, why not say Tillel David then a third time? If we're not following the reasons that were given before, that the night is not as man tefillah, that Tzemach Tzedek did not accept those reasons, so if you're actually davening Ma'ariv, so why not just say Tillel David a third time and not rely on what it happens when that's saying that it comes down me'elav on its own? So to explain what the Tzemach Tzedek here says, and then this will explain the point that the Rebbe said before, that there's the Tzemach Tzedek which is explaining this subject according to the Gemara, al pi nigle, and then there's the Rebbe's father which is explaining the same subject according to the Zohar, according to Pnimiyus HaTorah. When it comes to those levels that are beyond the reach of a person through his Aveda in this world, and therefore they come into the world from the Eibishter's initiative on its own, and a person cannot access and bring down these revelations into the world. And it comes into the world after a person makes the necessary preparations, und gerät zu a Kli Muchscher aufzunehmen die Amshachas Momaila. And a person prepares the proper vessel to receive these revelations from above, but then these revelations really come down completely from Hashem, and a person is not generating or triggering these revelations from above. That's a certain category of revelations. This is in the language of Chassidus is usually known as an Asarusa de La'ela that comes down from Hashem, from Hashem's initiative, without the Asarusa de L'Sata from below that triggers it. So generally, this can be divided into two different categories. Aleph, the first is Madregis, in ganzen Hecher von Avodas Adam. There are those levels that are completely out of the reach of whatever a person does in this world. They don't at all relate to any action or anything a person will do to bring it down into the world. Where do we find this? Al derech wie bei Kriyas Yamsuf. This is what we see by Kriyas Yamsuf. Was der Rebishter hat gesagt, va'atem tachrischen, that the Yidden should be quiet. They shouldn't even daven and ask Hashem to save them, because there's a revelation that will happen that is beyond their reach altogether. As darf nit sein kein tefillah. It's not required to have any davening. Weil de Muhammad Mulmailos von Azar Orte Madrege, wus is nit shayich kein avodas Adam. Because the war that the Eibusher will fight against the Mitzrayim that were then chasing the Yidden comes from a place where the Yidden do not need to say anything, do not need to draw this down. It comes totally from above. On the contrary, the famim is avodas Adam mevalvel. It's even possible that anything a person will do involving the mitzias of a person below will only limit and confuse or disturb this pure revelation that comes from such a pure and high place, totally removed of who the person is. This is one level. But then there's another level that comes from above. Madreges, there are such levels, and velachis is shayach avodas Adam. There is some of a connection to the avodah of a person in this world. Nor, however, the avodah is nit an inyan from chayva, but here the avodah, the actions of the person is not something which is an obligation of blois reshus, but it's something which is only optional, it's voluntary. And what's the point there? The asiyas adam is nitzu oifton, the amshacha mamayla. The action the person does not generate, it does not trigger this revelation from above. Because here's the rule, and this is a very fundamental point. Anytime there is a level of revelation from above that a person can draw down, it's accessible and it's reachable through his Aveda, so then that becomes an obligation. That's what our entire Aveda in this world is, to bring down godliness into this world. So if it's a level that we could access with our Aveda, that's when that Aveda becomes obligatory. Nor rather, over here, this is something which a person cannot generate this revelation. But this revelation into the world, which comes as a gift from Hashem, from above, it should have the proper impact in the world here below. It should have the full, complete impact that it could have in this world. So in other words, the manner in how it comes down into the world. It's a gift that Hashem gives to us. But the way this gift will be accepted and received in this world. And there's an example that the Tzemach Tzedek brings for this. Wie de Dugme, was der Tzemach Tzedek bringt, and this is the example that the Tzemach Tzedek brings for this, von Askaras Tal, mentioning the dew, which comes every day, every morning. As Chachamim did not obligate one to mention about the dew that's brought into the world every day when you daven Shemona Esrei. Val tal is hecher fun is harusa de l'sata. The dew that comes into the world is beyond the reach of anything that the actions of what's done here below. Tal metzar. Tal is something that's never held up. It comes from Hashem above, whether the world is deserving, not deserving, whatever season it is in the year, whatever the climate is. Tal always comes down. But v'imbola hasker masker. However, as the Gemara says, if you want to mention the tal, the blessing of the tal that Hashem gives us, you may mention it in Shemona Esrei, and that's our minhag today, that we mention the tal in Shemona Esrei, Moed dat tal in the summer. Kidei sheyehei lebracha. And the point is not that by you mentioning the tal, it's your aveda, your davening and asking for this tal generates this tal to come into the world. Rather, the tal comes down, but the way it's going to be accepted in the world, that it should be accepted fully with as a blessing, in a way of a blessing, in a positive way. For this, you could mention the tal in Shemona Esrei to be able to receive it in a way of a blessing. And it's the same thing also going back here to the point regarding those things that are reshus, that you may daven meitiv and so on. Und the far is an oifen von reshus. So therefore, this hamshacha which is generated totally from above is a gift. So therefore, this is something which is only voluntary. Since we're dealing with something which is totally beyond the reach of a person's aveda, is this haninyan von reshus? So therefore, this is something which is only voluntary. Es ist nicht shaykh, as man soll machriach sein, kaviyachol, as die hamshacha soll sein kedeboy. It's not possible to say that a person can force and he can generate and he can trigger this hamshacha to come down into this world the way it's supposed to come down. It's not in a person's reach. So in other words, we can't obligate the person to take this action because this is something that he can't bring down. And also, we can't force it down. We can't reach that level. We can't bring it down from its source above. So this is not an obligation on a person. But it's still voluntary in order to accept it and with its full shleimus in this world. So when you do this Aveda in connection to this Hamshacha, which is coming as a gift, it will add a certain shleimus in the way it's going to be received in this world. The same is true regarding davening Ma'ariv, which is voluntary. The union that takes place through Ma'ariv is a level of a union that comes on its own, from Hashem's initiative, as a gift. Is a b'da an art for tfilis arvis, b'ayvim shel reshus lakapanim, but there's still room for a person to daven the Ma'ariv as the yichud zal zayin lebracha v'chayetze b'zeh. In order that this yichud that comes down through Ma'ariv should be accepted in this world in a way of a blessing, or anything similar to this, that to add some shleimus to this yichud in this world, so therefore there's a point voluntarily to daven Ma'ariv. That's the explanation of why Ma'ariv is on one end not an obligation, but yet it's voluntary. Now, connecting these back to Tehillah David. So what does the Tzemach Tzedek say? That if Ma'ariv is voluntary, so then there's no point to say Tehillah David in connection to Ma'ariv at all, and we're not going to compare Tehillah David to Ma'ariv and say that just like Ma'ariv is voluntary, so saying Tehillah David should also be voluntary. So there's a difference here, and that's what the Rebbe now explains. So why we say that only Ma'ariv is a reshus, and davening Ma'ariv will affect the manner and how this Hamshacha comes down in the world, but we can't say that regarding saying Tehillah David this third time in connection to Ma'ariv. So saying this Tehillah David this third time, which the Tzemach Tzedek says, it comes me'elov, it creates Hamshacha, it comes on its own. So the Tzemach Tzedek explains, what is this? As das is ma'ire de madrege von wannen, es is maschil sheirish es eirus yichadzun. This is bringing the Hamshacha from its source, from the ultimate source of where it begins the inspiration for this unification that takes place between Zah and Nukve, which is Zah and Malchus. In other words, saying Tehillah David is really going back to the source of any union that takes place. The union that takes place above in the Spheres is usually referred to as the union of Zah and Malchus, which is the yichud of Kutshe B'richu Shchinte, which we also say every morning. Zah are the Eibishter's Midas. Malchus is the expression where Hashem communicates, and Malchus is related to speech or communication that comes out into the world. And the union between the Midas and the Malchus is bringing that intensity that exists in the emotions, Kaviyachal Amayla by the Eibishter, that intense revelation that there is in the level of Zah, that it should be drawn out and connected to the words of the Asara Mamaris, that the Eibishter creates the world, and that creates a greater flow into the world. But what's saying Tehillah David? Tehillah David is reaching into the source that's above Zah and above Malchus, that is the cause for this union. In order for a union of two levels to take place, two levels that are very far apart from each other, what brings them together? What creates this opening and this flow from a higher level into the lower level, even though usually they're separated from one another, they're a world apart? That's when there's a higher level, there's a shadish, a higher level, a pnimius, a deeper level that's revealed, and that creates this unification. So over here as well, the unification of Zah and Malchus is by reaching into a shadish, into a deeper place that brings it about. That's what Tehillah David over here is. So therefore it's understood as follows. As the Amira hotnet kenart with Tfilas Arvis, that there's no point to even voluntarily say this at the time when you daven Ma'ariv. Why? Das was is mispal arves by from shoulder shos akapanim. The fact that we do daven that maitiv at least as a rishos is negay blois and oifum pu'ula sayichut chulu. This is not because by davening maitiv we're able to generate the actual amshacha itself. The amshacha of maitiv comes as a matana, as a gift from above. Rather, davening maitiv voluntarily is just to bring it down in a certain way. It should come down as a bracha, it should come down with a certain shleimus. The effect that this hamshacha, that this gift will have here in this world. Nit kedei oitzo oiftan dem yichud, kanal. But the davening maitiv is not that we, by saying this tefillah of maitiv, generate or trigger this hamshacha itself. It's beyond the reach of a person. So if so, when it comes to saying till David, was kommt me'eire sein dem Ort, was is maschel sheirisches eires yichud. So over here, the third time saying till David, this is reaching and creating a revelation, revealing the source in order to create this unification. Das heißt, es darf öftan dem yichud. Here, the third time of till David is in order to reveal this higher source, to create the union. In them is Nechayach Aveda Sadam Kanal. Over here, the Aveda of a person, of saying till David, to create this union, there's no place for this, because the Aveda of a person does not reach there. It comes purely as a gift from above. So therefore, over here, the Tehillah David, which is to create this union, to create the Amshacha from above, there's no place for the person to say this. Okay, now this is all the explanation of what the Tzemach Tzedek says based on what it said in the Gemara, that if davening maitiv is a rishos, so then saying till David is not even voluntary at all. It's a level where a person can't reach at all. Now we'll understand why the Rebbe's father says that according to the Zohar, you still can say Tehillah David in connection to maitiv. Everything we explained here until here is all according to the revealed aspect of Teire. Was the langt in Galia the Kutshabirichu. The revealed aspect of Teire is revealed because it's that level of Teire which has the revealed aspect of the Eibishter in it. Chitzonius kaviyachol hakesa, a more external level of godliness which is related to the external level of keser or b'meila. So therefore, over here in this section of Teire is nechayach kenasiyah mitzad adam in oiftan dem yichud. There is no action that the person here below can do in order to create this union of Zah and Malchus, which is again created how? By revealing a certain pnimius, a certain deeper level above that brings about this unification. In the revealed aspect of Teire, a person with his Aveda below cannot access that level of pnimius that's so deep and far beyond his reach to create this union. Val yichud nemtzich from pnimius hakeser. How do you create a union? When you draw from a pnimius, from a deeper level of keser. The regular flow that there is from one level to the next. There's always a flow. There's always a certain amshacha that comes from chachme to bina to das. There's always the flow that comes from meichen, then to midais, and then from the midais of the Eibishter into malchus, which is the asaram amaris, where the Eibishter communicates to the world. There's always a flow from one level to the next. But that's not a yichud though. There's a flow when it transitions from one level to another. There is a tremendous tzimtzum. Whatever existed in the higher level does not come down and open up fully to the lower level. What exists in the level of intellect and then comes down in emotions, it changes completely. What exists in emotions and then comes out into words, the words don't carry the same intensity that there is internally in emotions. That's true by a human being. And the same thing that's also by the Eibishter. What exists in Meichen, when it comes down to Midas, then it comes down into Malchus, there's a flow, but it is not an opening of what exists above to come down below. What's Yichud? Yichud means there's a unification. The union accomplishes that the same intensity that there is in a higher level is completely opened up into the lower level. And that's a added level of godliness that gets revealed into the world. How do you create that union? Only by revealing a pnimius. When there's a amshacha that comes down b'chitzonius externally, so then it gets minimized and it gets very changed when it comes into a lower level. But when you reveal the pnimius, the deeper purpose and essence of what everything is, here they all get unified as one. So in order to draw down, or to create rather, this union, it's through accessing the pnimius of Kesed, the deepest levels. And that's something that's beyond the reach of a person. So therefore, Tehillah David in connection to Maitiv, which is creating this union, is not something which is even voluntary for a person to say. However, if you look at this from the perspective of the deeper aspects of Torah, was the langt and sassen the kutshabirichu. Pnimius HaTorah is connected to the concealed levels of Hashem. Pnimius HaKeser, connected to the Pnimius of Keser. Is das an inyan von Aveide euch in Oiftan? Is da an inyan von Aveide euch in Oiftan dem Yichud? From this perspective, there is some kind of Aveide that the person can do in relation to this Yichud to create this union. However, the Aveide in die Madregis is nit an Oiftan von Chayva, nor b'derech Rishus. The fact that a person's Aveide here has a connection to this Pnimius to create this union is not an obligation, but it's only voluntary. And the explanation is as follows, based on what we said before. Zayin de gan ort, because this is a level, vo aveda sodden de grechnet. The aveda of a person, who he is in this world with his entity and his limitations, cannot reach there. Uns is nit shaykh as avedes adam soll dorten oiftan. It's impossible that a person's aveda should accomplish anything there, should generate a new amshache on that level. Is the Aveide nit an inyan von Chayva. So therefore over here, the Aveide of a person in this world is not an obligation. Was bavais as that Adam is mechayev machriach, which means that the person is obligated, or the person can force and he can reach and draw and generate this hamshacha. Tutayif durch sein Aveide. He's creating this, he's accomplishing this with his Aveide. Rather, as is blois anasiyah, this is the action of the person, was git dem Adam a shayches to dem inyan was wird getan. That gives him a relation to this hamshacha that he's accomplishing. So this is a different type of connection that a person's Aveda has. There's the connection that a person has with his Aveda, his limited being, who he is, and his Aveda here, with these limitations that he has the power to reach certain limited levels of godliness and to draw down, to bring to his Aveda, the value and the Aveda that he does, reaches certain levels and draws down that level of Amshacha. That's the concept of Asrusa de Lasata, Asrusa de La'ela, where the Aveda of a person has a certain Kayach. But then over here, what we're talking about is that there's a deeper Kayach in a Yid, where the Eibishter says that a Yid has a Kayach, that he has a connection not only to those levels above that are related to his limited being, but he, being a Yid and a Neshama of a Yid here in this world, has a relation and a connection even to those levels that are unlimited, that are beyond, that are not connected to his limited being, who he is. And the Eibishter desires that a Yid should draw down even those levels. So even though, yes, it's true that you can't say that it's the limited person that he below, with his kayach, has that kayach to draw it down, it's the kayach of the Eibishter, really. It's the desire of the Eibishter that a Yid should be able to draw this down that gives him this relation to even those levels of pnimius that's beyond the limited kayach of a person. So in Nigla de Torah, it's speaking about the person and his limited kaychas that he has and what that's able to reach. Pnimius HaTorah discusses from a deeper angle, from a deeper perspective, the ratzon of the Eibishter coming from a place of Pnimius. What the Eibishter's deeper desire is that a Yid should have a connection even to the deepest hamshachas that comes from above. Even there, a Yid could draw this down and has a relation to this as well. On the far, and therefore is mitzad Pnimius HaTorah. From the perspective of Pnimius HaTorah, faran the meaning from Amiris Tillel David Eich B'Tfilas Harvest. So you have the saying of Tillel David even when you daven Ma'ariv, as a voluntary. It is voluntary to daven Ma'ariv, and there's a concept of saying Tillel David as a praise. Nor the Amiris blois begin shvacha, but here this Tillel David is not the other two times of Tillel David which we say, which is for the mezainis of a person, the parnas of a person, that is an obligation which a person draws, a level that he can reach. But here this is something else. This is a praise. But it's kamayval derech rishus. It's similar to Ma'ariv, which is only voluntary. Der tafkid from der Amire here, the third time we say Tillel David, is nit zu schaffen machriach zayna hamshacha from mezainis v'chulu. This is not saying Tillel David where this is a level that the person can reach through his aveda to draw down the sustenance that he needs for his life, for his mitzias in this world. No, it says a hilul l'shvach for the Eibishter. Rather, we're praising the Eibishter on a much higher level, and therefore connecting a yid as a kayach to connect to a level of pnimius, to a level of godliness, which is really beyond the mitzias and the reach of the person. This is a special power that the Eibishter gives to every single yid to be able to connect even to those levels that are beyond his limitations. So now another point here is we don't actually say this to Hillel David during Maitiv. Now in order to emphasize as Dia Mirif and Hillel David is Blois and Inyan Funishos, that the third time we say Hillel David is only voluntary. Nid via Miris Hillel David b'Shachris Mincha. Unlike the Hillel David that we say by Shachris Mincha, which is an obligation, that Hillel David that you say then is something that a person can reach, and it's to provide the parnasa that he needs. So it was instituted to say this not during Shachris itself, again, not during Maitiv itself that is, but rather the next morning in Shachris. So, but when we say it the next morning in Shachris, that's really saying it in connection to the Maitiv of the night before. And here the Rebbe says, we say twice, Tehillah David and Shachris, once before Shemayin Esrei in the Psukei de Zimra and once after Shemayin Esrei. So it's when we say it in Psukei de Zimra, that is the Tehillah David which was related to the Maitiv the night before. Und das Gufe in Psukei de Zimra, where do we say the Tehillah David which is really related to the Maitiv of the night before? We say it in the Psukei de Zimra, and those Psukim where we're praising the Eibishter was kommt, Fat Tfilah Shemayin Esrei de Shachris. Even before we daven the Shemayin Esrei of that morning. So how can we say this Tehillah David, which is the connection that a Yid has to such a high level, to an unlimited place, and a Yid is saying this Tehillah David, this Shvach, praising the Eibishter, with what power does a Yid say this in the morning, even before he daven Shemayin Esrei? The Yeshleima, so we can say, as the Koyach of Tzekana Mahala Zayin the Eibishter, with the Hillas with the power that the Yid has to praise the Eibishter with these praises that he says in Ashrei and Tehillah David, noch Edem is mispal Tfilah Shemayin Esrei b'Shachris, even before you daven the Shemayin Esrei in the morning. Net man from dem Yichud from Tfilas Arvis Shalifneza. This is really following the Maitiv, the davening, the Shemayin Esrei that you daven the night before, which is the Yichud that there is the night before, and the Maitiv that you daven, which brings the shleimus of that Yichud the night before, and then in connection to this, and following and using that power of the night before, we say Ashrei the next day. So really the Ashrei of the morning is related to the way you daven Maitiv, or the Yichud that there is the night before. This is a big chiddush that Rabbi is saying here, as it's pointed out in the footnotes, that in other places it's mashma, that the Maitiv that we say after Shemayin Esrei is the Maitiv related to the night before, but here the Rebbe is telling us, no, it's actually the Tehillah David that we say in Psukei de Zimra is following the Yichud of the night before. Now the Rebbe explains another thing that it says regarding the Tehillah Davids that we have to say every day based on this. The Mitbet Noich Verstehen, with this we could also understand what the steht in Zohar dort. The Zohar there tells us, as Parnase Loichazi LeMishal, that it's not appropriate for a person to ask Hashem for what he needs in his sustenance, Elo Bosat Sloisa, only after he davens Shemayin Esrei, Uparnasa Demore, when you, so to speak, provide Hashem with his Parnasa by davening to Hashem. V'stafar sagt man Tehillah David noch Shemayin Esrei b'Shachris. And therefore we say Tehillah David again after you daven Shemayin Esrei and Shachris. And now on das, was by Tfilas Mincha sagt man as Kaidem Slaisa. So then why is it that by Mincha we do say Tehillah David only once, and we say it before davening the Shemayin Esrei? Why wouldn't we say it after? As Isaiah says, that you should, saying the Tehillah David is mainly the pasuk of Pesach Hasidecha, asking Hashem for your Parnasa, that should come after you daven Shemayin Esrei. So why do we say it before? Is this weil noch Sloisa de Mincha is as man from Dina Kashya. After you daven mincha, you're coming later in the afternoon, it's coming towards the evening, the nighttime. That's a time of harsh judgment. And therefore it's not a time to ask Hashem for parnasa. You may be judged then. And it's the same thing also, it says there regarding Maitiv as well. That's one of the points that we brought before. We don't say extra tefillis by Maitiv as well. Okay, so that's the explanation that it says in the Zohar. But the question of this is, l'chayr is not move on, but this question still remains. Hey, nemes has mekanet beten of mezainis noch mincha. True, so we can't say Tehillah David. We can't ask for mezainis, for sustenance. After the Shemayin Esrei of Mincha, was as man von Dina Kashya, it's a time where there's a judgment. Aber wie kemen es beten koidem tzleise? But how could we say Tehillah David even before we daven Shemayin Esrei? Noch edem mit tutayv parnasa demare. Before we provide Hashem, as the Zohar says, his sustenance by davening Shemayin Esrei to him. But based on what we said before regarding the way it works with the Tehillah David of Maitiv, that it said before Shemayin Esrei in Shachris the next day, so we could say here similar. As das is the far, was much mispal gewähnt, Tfilah Shachris, since we already daven Shemayin Esrei of Shachris, so bleibt da Reishim from Tfilah Shachris, there's still a certain mark, there's still a certain impression that's here from what you did when you daven Shachris and you provided Hashem with that parnasa, so to speak. So therefore we could say the Ashrei before we daven the Shemoneh Esrei of Mincha. So that's the point over here, that we have here the explanation of the Rebbe, the difference between the Tzemach Tzedek's Pshat and the Rebbe's father's Pshat. The Tzemach Tzedek is explaining things al Pinigle, and therefore you cannot say Tillel David and Ma'ariv to reach to this level of Pnimius. A Yid, looking at a Yid al Pinigle, with his limitations in this world, he can't reach this level. So there's no point in saying Tillel David a third time. The Rebbe's father is explaining, according to the Zohar, that you could reach. A Yid does have a connection. And the Eibishter wants and gives you the koyach to have a connection, even to the deepest levels, to the pnimius of the Eibishter. And therefore, we say Tillel David a third time, but we say it not together with Ma'ariv itself, but we say it the next morning Shachris, following Ma'ariv. And that inyan is the Tzemach Tzedek Meramas Bekitze. This point that the Rebbe's father spells out, the Tzemach Tzedek already hints to this concisely. With Nishraibim, when he writes, as we quoted before, Tiknu loima b'shachris beis pa'omim. It was instituted to say in Tillel David twice in Shachris. Al derech liYakev eshapodas Avram sha'teferes mata klape chesed. So you say the Tillel David that's connected to Ma'ariv, which Ma'ariv is teferes. So you say it in Shachris, which is chesed, because teferes is related to chesed. But the Tzemach Tzedek quotes the pasuk where it says Yaakov eshapodas Avram. Yaakov is the tefillah of Ma'ariv, which means was der mit is emeramis the shayches von amiris Tillel David b'shachris to tefillas harvest. What he's telling you is that when you're davening Shachris, and Shachris is corresponding to Avram. Avram is the one that instituted Shachris. But in your davening of Shachris, you start off with sort of taking the koyach of Yaakov. That Yaakov, which is Ma'ariv, you begin with the Psukei de Zimra. And the main thing why we say the Psukei de Zimra is all for the Tehillah David, the Asher that we say in it, that's what it says. So therefore, our whole entire tefillah of Shachris takes the koyach of Yaakov. And the Shaykhs on Amidas Tillel David b'Shachris to Tefillas Harvest. That's what the Tzemach Tzedek is hinting over here too, which is the point that the Rebbe's father says, that you could say Tillel David, at least as a shvach, in relation to the Ma'ariv as well. A Yid does have a Shaykhs to that level of Amshacha as well, but we say it in Shachris the next morning.